Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview Series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview Series on radio and podcast. I'm Paul Vogelzang. And as we stand on this precipice of America's 250th anniversary, the air around us is just thick with the sparks of cultural contention. But today, we're going to ask a pivotal question of our guest, our Smithsonian Associate guest. How can we lower the temperature of this conversation? In this episode, we're diving into the undercurrents of America's grand narrative with none other than returning guest, audience favorite, Smithsonian Associate Clay Jenkinson, a public humanities scholar who wields the past not as a weapon, but as a lantern in the murky debates of the present. Clay Jenkinson will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up, so please check out our website and show notes today for more details. The title of Clay Jenkinson's presentation via Zoom is The Culture Wars: How Can We Lower the Temperature? Clay Jenkinson's presentation and our conversation today will be rich with his wisdom. He's a senior, seasoned historian. He's got this amazing announcement to share with us today. I just invite you to consider the full spectrum of everything Clay Jenkinson has to tell you, especially about America these days, the valor and the vices, the triumphs and the tribulations, as Clay likes to put it, warts and all. As statues fall all around us and the legacies of figures like Theodore, Roosevelt, and Thomas Jefferson, who Clay Jenkinson will talk about today, warts and all, these wonderful members of America's past face the tides of modern scrutiny. Clay Jenkinson will offer us a voice of moderation. He beckons us away from the extremes of glorification and vilification to a place where we can engage with our history, all of it, with honesty and grace. Clay Jenkinson challenges us today to see the removal of a statue not as an erasure, but as a conversation and a conversation starter, to view the controversies surrounding America not as battles, but as growing pains of a democracy still striving towards its ideals. So as we prepare to mark this milestone in our nation's history, 250th anniversary again, just let us approach today's conversation with both the reverence and the critical eye that it deserves. Let's explore the pasts to cool the fires of division and fan the flames of understanding. Please stay tuned as we navigate the heated corridors of America's past and present. We're going to seek today to cool those waters. We're going to build some consensus. We're going to understand mutual respect. This is the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview Series, and I'm ready to move along this journey with you. Let's let the conversation begin. Please join me in welcoming to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview Series, Clay Jenkinson. Clay Jenkinson, welcome back to the program.
So glad to be here. This is getting to be an interesting habit we've got. I love it.
I do too. I have to tell you, my wife and I are big PBS fans, and we were watching Ken Burns' American Buffalo, and we saw Clay Jenkinson featured there, and I just thought, that's somebody I've talked to a couple times. So congratulations on that, by the way. Great work.
I was so fortunate to be in it. Ken Burns is an amazing man, as we all know, and he can anyone he wants will agree to an interview with him. And so the fact that he sometimes wants to talk with me is just delightful. And so he once told me, you can be in my films as long as you know how to stick the landing, say what you're going to say, stop, so we edit it.
Oh, that's great. That's really great. Good for you. Well, again, congrats and on all your work. We're going to talk today about your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation titled "The Culture Wars: How Can We Lower the Temperature?" I think the timing is just perfect for this, Clay Jenkinson. You seem to have your pulse on so much, and I think this is one of those conversations that we need to be having. So why don't we just start there? Maybe tell us briefly about your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation, and we're going to be doing this over Zoom with Smithsonian. Maybe tell us how you're going to use Zoom to engage our audience.
Well, the audience is gathered by Zoom, and I actually can't see them, but I know they're there.
Uh-huh.
Then I talk with Kathy Fuller, who's my moderator, and I think I've done 10 of these now or more.
Yeah.
The pandemic really opened this door.
Yeah.
And it's changed everything. So now Zoom technology and its rivals make lots of things possible at much less expense than ever before. So that's the joy of it. I'll have a PowerPoint, and then twice during the 2 hours there'll be a break in which we take questions. People will text in their questions, and Kathy will sort them out and put them to me. So I love the format. My only disappointment is that I can't see the audience. When I do public performances of any sort or lectures, I make sure that the house lights are on so I can actually watch people respond. But anyway, so the theme is one that's very dear to my heart. I'm really worried. I'm deeply worried about the future of the United States. We're approaching our 250th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
That should be a time for reflection and celebration. It needs to be done honestly, and we need to look at ourselves, warts and all. But I think that we're so polarized now. I'm going to use some shorthand here, but sort of the 1619 project on the one hand, on the left, and then sort of Ted Cruz on the right, where there's no conversation anymore. It's just shouting. It's vilification. It's demonizing. There's a belief now on each side that the other side is not truly American, that America belongs to whichever silo I'm in, and the other people are either dangerous, bigoted, racist rednecks, or they are communist-inspired liberals who want to cancel American culture and want to apologize for this country. And you and I know that that's not really true, that most of the American people are centrists of one sort or another, and that we desperately need to have real conversations about real subjects. And if we can't be civil, then I don't see how we can possibly get anywhere. I'm schooled in the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment's idea was that anything can be talked about, and that the good ideas will drive out the bad, and that good sense will drive out nonsense. And I continue to believe that, but I don't think that that's as widely believed today as it used to be. It's become a sort of zero-sum game, and there's a lot of anger and rage in all of this, which I just frankly can't understand.
Thank you for that. I just couldn't agree with you more. I think as a centrist, I find that, and as an older American, I certainly am a believer, and I see all the wonder that the country has created. My family are immigrants, and so I really do view this as a wonderful country. But I do know, just as you put it, there are warts, and we've got to get into this in a way that's balanced, I think. Maybe give us your sense as to how we handle this balance. How do we celebrate on one hand, the country's history, but do so with a fair assessment of all the complexities, warts and all?
Well, I think that since the 1960s, we've had a cultural revolution in the United States. I use that term deliberately, that our way of seeing America has changed. So we've had women's studies and feminism. We've had minority studies, and we have queer studies. We have paid much greater attention now to the environmental cost of the American dream. There's a wider lens that we wear now. There's a more inclusive lens that we wear now than existed, say, in the time of Ozzie and Harriet and Leave It to Beaver. That's all good. And that's been an amazing and important cultural revolution. But I think that it left many Americans behind. I don't think the universities did a very good job of bringing the public into the conversation. Frankly, I don't think that the academic world is very respectful of average Americans. I think that they look down on most Americans as rubes and ignoramuses, and that causes that condescension is very well understood by the people in the heartland who feel betrayed by that, and that makes them reactive rather than conversant. And so I think that some of this is because of the way in which these breathtaking cultural changes have occurred without making any reasonable effort to bring the people along. So that's part of it. And so I think the answer is we have to grant agency to everybody. You know, I'm going off on this 250th journey myself in the next 5 years. I have an Airstream. I'm going to, it's called Listening to America. I'm going to go around the country and talk to people, famous people, and then average people in campgrounds and in universities and in think tanks and in national parks and so on. And what I intend to do is to listen. And so, I often meet people whose views are dramatically different from my own. I'm not going to scoff. I'm going to listen, and I'm going to ask sort of Socratic follow-up questions, because there's always something behind whatever is the surface statement or surface opinion. There's something. There's a frustration. There's a wound. There's a fear. There's a sense of righteousness or anxiety about where this country is heading. I think if we learn to listen to each other, I mean, really respectfully listen, I think that people are ready to talk, and I think that they calm down once they realize that they are being heard and not just being sort of indulged at arm's length.
Amazing. That's really, I'm smiling here, Clay Jenkinson, because I just think of you in an Airstream, and I just think what a wonderful way to put yourself into a position to talk and to listen in particular, and have conversations that are meaningful around a significant anniversary for our country. And do you plan on talking about historical figures? Do you talk about issues of the day? Maybe tip us off, because I'll say this selfishly. I'd love to have you back and talk further about this, but I mean, I'm curious, and just pursuing it for a moment. What is the plan?
Well, I'd love to check in with you every couple of weeks on this journey. I'm going to do John Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie journey first. I'm going to start in Long Island. I'm going to go to the tip of Maine. I'm going to go across the northern tier of the country to Seattle, and then down to Monterey, where he was, where his home is, and then to San Diego, over to Texas and New Orleans, and then back up the East Coast to New York. So that's the first of many journeys. Then I'm going to do Theodore Roosevelt's conservation footprint around the country, and I'll retrace the Lewis and Clark Trail. But I'm just using these as frameworks on which to hang this set of concerns that I have. So here's what I'm going to do, Paul. When I meet somebody, and we've gotten comfortable, I'm going to say, finish this sentence. You can't understand America unless you understand X. And people, one person might say, well, religion, or another person might say opportunity, or another person might say race, or the frontier, or violence. I don't know what people are going to say, but I'm eager. That's a starting question. I'm also going to say, are we one nation? Do we share a narrative of who we are and how we got here, or are we now two or more nations? And I'm going to say to people, if you could use an Archimedean lever and put it somewhere to sort of to restore America to what you think it is at its best, where would you start? Would it be education? Would it be national service for everybody? Would it be, I don't know. But I'm going to ask this series of sort of open-ended questions, and let people then talk. And I'm going to listen and ask the follow-up questions to try to really hear them. And I think that my sense is that the people are really aching for some sort of healing process. That I don't think anybody likes where we are, except Matt Gaetz on the one hand and somebody else on the opposite of that. But I think most Americans are bewildered by this.
Yeah,
they're hurt. They think, come on, America still matters. America, the word America is still one of the world's magic words. We have a duty to live up to the promise of that word. And so I think most people are eager to talk, but they don't want to be talked at, and they don't want to be talked down to, and they don't want to be caricatured. And many of these sort of travel books that you see, and I'll just name one, William Least Teat Moon's Blue Highways, which I enjoy. He goes out and there's sort of I feel a sort of condescending attitude towards people in the heartland, that they're quirky and they're maybe a little bigoted, or they're a little rough, but maybe they have a nugget of wisdom. I don't agree with that at all. I think that people are people, and that America is a spectacularly diverse place, and that it's my duty to go listen with real deep respect. And that's harder than it seems, as I'm sure you know.
Hi, it's Paul. Do you love entertaining, informative, eclectic, insightful programs about culture, health, science, life, and everything Smithsonian? As part of our Smithsonian Associates Interview Series on radio and podcast, we're introducing you to the new Smithsonian Associates streaming series. Smithsonian, a nonprofit organization, is excited to present this new aspect of their 55 years as the world's largest museum-based educational program. Join us from the comfort of your home as we periodically interview Smithsonian Associate guest speakers. Our audience here on radio and podcast can explore our website for more information, links, and details at notold-better.com. Thanks, everybody. We are with award-winning historian, author, public humanities scholar, and Smithsonian Associate Clay Jenkinson. Clay Jenkinson's been a previous guest. Clay Jenkinson will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up here pretty close, November 14th. The title of Clay Jenkinson's presentation is The Culture Wars: How Can We Lower the Temperature? I think that's such a great title. It's always so great to talk with you, Clay Jenkinson. I always learn something, and I've learned something here today about your travels across America, your upcoming travels, your plans. Wonderful stuff. My goodness. Congratulations on all of your work, of course. I think one of the things that has been in the news, certainly not so much of late, but I think it's still on the minds of a lot of Americans, and that is this issue that we have with public statues, memorials, and how they represent our history, and how they do that inclusively. And so I wonder if you'd talk for a moment about how we might handle public statues, because that can be one of those bellwether issues that can be just this moment of lightning rod difficulty, supercharged kind of vitriol, all of these things around something that's so inanimate and almost inconsequential, but not in many ways.
Well, this is really complex. So I'll say this. Number one, these need to be local decisions. There is not a one-size-fits-all national response to Confederate statues or to statues that caricature Native Americans or Hispanic Americans. There is not a one-size-fits-all approach to this. So we need to defer to local democracy on this. Number two, everybody needs to be at the table, every stakeholder. So that this just can't be the town council meeting to try to decide whether to keep up the statue of Stonewall Jackson. You need to have people from every constituency group, and they need to be brought in and treated with great respect. Everyone's voice matters. These need to be community-wide decisions, not decisions of the city council or the county board of supervisors. So that's the second thing. Everyone has to be at the table. And third, I'm a humanities scholar, and so my motto came from one of my mentors: judgment is easy, understanding is hard. And judgment is easy, understanding is hard. So, why was the statue put up of Buffalo Bill Cody shooting the last buffalo in Kansas? What did it signify when it was erected? What did people have in mind when they put it there? How have our attitudes changed since then? What makes us think that we're right and they were wrong? wouldn't it be more useful in a way to use this as a teachable moment to say, when this was put up, nobody objected because it seemed like the right thing to do. But now we're a little squeamish about the slaughter of the buffalo in Kansas. And so we probably wouldn't put up such a statue today. But is it right to burn it down, tear it down, melt it down, put it in a warehouse? Is that the best thing we can do? And number 4, I always try to keep this in mind, Paul. What will they say of us 1,000 years from now? And what makes us think that we're the enlightened ones? I certainly don't think that we're the enlightened ones. I think that we are making the same mistakes, only different, that all cultures make. We have blindnesses, we have prejudices. There's a faddishness that sweeps through us, and one of those fads now is what I call the de-Stalinization of America. Let's rip down all the offensive statues and signs, and then what do we have? So, if you go down this path, Jefferson has to go. Slaveholder, clearly a racist in some sense of that term. If you go down this path, Winston Churchill has to go. Imperialist, with scathing attitudes towards third world peoples and indigenous peoples. If you go down this path, who will escape whipping? Hamlet says, treat every man according to his deserts, and who shall escape whipping? So I think we should be humble in the face of this, and I think it's our duty to try to understand. I'll give you a really good example. The American Museum of Natural History in New York took down its statue group of Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt was on horse. On one side of him was an African gun bearer, barefoot, standing. On the other side of him was a Native American, barefoot, and he was clearly in the sort of the moral of the statue group, leading these indigenous people towards civilization. The American Museum of Natural History wrestled with this for many years. They did extensive research. They put up a really extraordinary exhibit about it, and then eventually they decided, it does really have to go. But they did it after extraordinary deliberation. And one of their arguments, and one that I particularly admire, is that they thought, well, that statue group of TR with indigenous people doesn't really say anything about the mission of the American Museum of Natural History. So it was sort of an oddball thing to do, even when it was done. And so they carefully, and everyone was at the table. They did absolutely everything right. And they decommissioned it. They didn't melt it down. They didn't attack Roosevelt. They just said, in our opinion, statues go up. Sometimes statues come down. That seemed acceptable to them, and it certainly seems acceptable to me. But I wouldn't use that to take down every Roosevelt statue in the country.
I always enjoy talking to you. I'm smiling. I think as an educator, I learned so much from you as a humanities scholar. And I wonder if you talk for a second about these extraordinarily complex figures in history like Jefferson and some of these other public intellectuals. How do educators, how do historians help the public navigate and get through some of this so that we're understanding and so that we're educated as opposed to being divided?
Well, these are divisive things, because if you take down a statue of Robert E. Lee in Charlottesville, there are going to be people who feel that their own way of seeing life is being sneered at and demoted and discarded. And so they are not going to be cheerful about this. They might be more cheerful if they had been at the table in the first place, and if they had been able to state their views, and if they had listened to other arguments, and there had been sort of an agreement that we will come to a consensus. So keeping all the stakeholders in the conversation is really important. I'll give you an example. So I just moderated a symposium in Western North Dakota on Theodore Roosevelt, and it was pretty tough on Roosevelt. And one of the talks by an eminent scholar, it was a brilliant talk, showed that Roosevelt really was a jerk when it comes to Native Americans. That he said awful things. I won't repeat them. And I had to say a couple of them from the stage in this event, and I could barely let the words come out of my mouth. They're so awful. That doesn't necessarily say everything there is to say about Roosevelt and Native Americans, and it certainly doesn't say everything we need to know about Roosevelt. So we need to realize that he was a man of his times. When he made these utterances, he was a very young man, and so something of a hothead. he later sort of matured into a more nuanced view of American history. This was when Manifest Destiny was still chugging through the veins of the American people. And so you need to contextualize it and to try to realize, to use the cliche, where they were coming from when they said these things. So, or take Jefferson. I've been studying Jefferson now for 40 years, and I've been Jefferson now for 30-some years. Right. So I know him inside and out, as it were. Yeah. There's no question in my mind that he was a racist. If by racist we mean that African Americans, in his mind, were subordinate, both in their capacities and in their rights, to white Americans. That's hard to say, but I think it's undeniably true. We also know that he was a slaveholder, that he bought and sold slaves, including secretly, furtively, while he was the president of the United States. And of course, there's the Sally Hemings story too. So this has to be acknowledged. We can't pretend any longer that Jefferson was a reluctant slaveholder. He wanted us to believe that he was a reluctant slaveholder, and maybe he even was, but it didn't stop him from owning more than 600 human beings in the course of his life. And so we were in denial about this so long that when the reaction came in the 1980s, 90s, and so on, it went too far the other direction, I think. Now he's being canceled in many quarters. I think it's now important for us to recenter Jefferson. And so I've created this thing I call the Asterisk Project, in which I will never again talk about any of Jefferson's achievements without also acknowledging that they were made possible by enslaved people. So let me give you one quick example. He has this magnificent garden at Monticello, one of the world's most beautiful vegetable gardens, 1,000 feet long. It's a terrace on the side of his mountain. When you go there, you gasp at its beauty and its fertility and the genius of Thomas Jefferson, until you realize that terrace was built by gangs of black slaves working tirelessly in grunt labor over several years to build a terrace on the side of a mountain. And so when you know that, you can't unknow that. Your admiration for that garden doesn't stop, but it's chastened now. There's something of a cloud that attaches itself to it. And I think that's so important for us to acknowledge that the University of Virginia was built by enslaved people. That in Washington, D.C., when Jefferson had his famous dinner parties, enslaved people took your coat, they served you, they removed the human bodily waste from the site, they washed the floors, they cooked the food, they built the thing. And so we need to always keep that in our mind. It doesn't have to be the center or the only thing we think about, but we can no longer pretend that Jefferson was Leonardo da Vinci and, oh yes, there's this sort of issue that he was also a slaveholder. I think that we have to be more forthright. And so as we talk about the 250th birthday of the country, it's going to have to be candid in some ways that's going to make us uncomfortable. I repeat, we're going to be made uncomfortable if we have an honest discussion of how this country got to be where it is. I live in North Dakota, so I'm talking to you today from lands that were sovereign to the Mandan and the Hidatsa, whose lands were stripped from them sometimes by treaty, more often by executive order, and that's just not okay. It's not that we're going to give the land back necessarily, or leave the continent, but we have to acknowledge that if we want to be honest and candid about how we got here from 1492. And so, this sounds pretty simple, Paul, but it's not. Because there will be people who just automatically resist and say, "No way! I never heard any Native American. I just own my property. Don't tell me that we have something to atone for." I think that the reaction is the reaction of people who are suddenly caught off guard and feel that their very way of seeing the world has been not only challenged but dismissed by know-it-alls.
Clay Jenkinson, it just is always such a pleasure to talk with you. I just have two final questions, kind of almost back to back. This is involved. It is complex. What's the role of cultural institutions? What's the responsibility that, for example, Smithsonian Associates plays in in lowering the temperature, as you say, cooling this current heated climate? What do some of these types of institutions do in order to respond to the debate but not polarize?
I think the Smithsonian is doing a great job. I'm sure that there are instances, as in any institution, where things can go wrong. But on the whole, from my observation, the Smithsonian does a superb job. And I'll tell you why. It's linked to the taxpayer. Mm-hmm. The taxpayer has a role in this. And if the Smithsonian put up an exhibit that said, American history has just been one damn moment of racism after the next, and that's all there really is to American history, the taxpayers would rebel and say, why are we funding this? And so I think that it's important, if you're watching the current, largely insane debate that's going on in our major universities about Gaza and Israel, mm-hmm. there isn't any check against extreme discourse, or not a sufficient check. And so I think democracy works. Mm-hmm. When I remember back in the NEH days when the Mapplethorpe photographs and
mm-hmm.
the Piss Christ photograph were getting funding, and the people mm-hmm. said, "Why are we funding this?"
Yeah,
and it's not that we know we don't want to give people the right to veto or to censor, but we do give them the right to be heard. And then the NEH was more careful after that about what it funded, and I think that's entirely appropriate. So I think the Smithsonian has a great advantage, as does the Library of Congress and so on, because they have to respond in some sense to the will of the people. And I think that really matters. If culture means I get to do whatever I want and 83% of the country just has to lump it, then that should be private. Mm-hmm. Then I should be doing that work myself. And if it finds a market, it finds a market. But if it doesn't, that's a warning to me. And so I really think that the institutions need to think through everything that they do and say, is this fair? Is this rigorous? Are all voices being heard? Are we making any inadvertent racist or sexist or misogynist assumptions here? I think that if you think it through and have someone, almost like in the Catholic Church at sainthood, you have a devil's advocate who if you're going to create a saint, the devil's advocate is meant to find out whatever bad things can be said of that saint. I think we need that. If NEH or NEA does a project or Smithsonian, I think there needs to be someone in the room who says, have we really thought this through? Because one argument that could be made against this exhibit is XXXX. Mm-hmm. I think that will help. I also think that we need to model civility. And so I get rude questions from time to time, mm-hmm. sometimes extremely rude questions. And I try always to swallow hard to be civil in my response. And when I get hate mail, as I occasionally do, I write back always a civil response. And mm-hmm. amazingly, Paul, 9 times, I'd say 7.5 times out of 10, the person who wrote the angry email writes back then and says, I was just blowing off. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. You're right. I should have been more civil. So I think that it's engagement based on real respect and without a sense of righteousness. I'm against righteousness in all of its forms. Mm-hmm. So I think it can be done, but it's a discipline. And I think many of our elite universities have given themselves over to the least inclusive voices.
Clay Jenkinson, as I say, I just always enjoy talking to you. You always do. You're such a wise person. You have just this real breadth of understanding of kind of where we are, and so you motivate me to do better and to learn and have over our conversations. I wonder if you'd leave us with maybe just a final word about how all of our audience, older adults, family members, across the spectrum of our audience, how can we together bring about our insights into a conversation so that we really can learn from each other, grow, and not be so heated at this moment?
Well, I not to sound flattery, but I think, sign up for Smithsonian events mm-hmm. because I think mm-hmm. Smithsonian does a really terrific job at this. And the Zoom technology actually has a kind of a filtering and chastening effect. So, there's no shouting. There may be sharp opinions, but there's no shouting. I also think that people need to, and this is so hard, but just take Israel and Gaza. Everyone has an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, most of us are confused, but we have opinions. But most of our opinions are based on almost no actual evidence or understanding. If we read a book or two about the history of Israel and its hostile neighbors, we would know more. Mm-hmm. But if you're taking your talking points from Rachel Maddow or from Sean Hannity, then you really haven't thought it through for yourself at all. And, we live in a time of breathtaking accessibility there are millions of books that are free on the internet, and then everything else is available on documentaries and on YouTube and so on. So anyone who wanted to know something about what's going on in Gaza today is in a position to do so. And if everyone would say 5 hours, watch a couple of documentaries and maybe read a few articles and really kind of examine this, and then only start to speak or pontificate about what must be done and who's to blame and how this comes out, we'd be much better off. But, what I find in traveling the country, Paul, is that people are lazy now, and they're largely just spouting talking points. The talking points used to come from Rush Limbaugh, and now they come from Tucker Carlson. The talking points come from Rachel Maddow or Lawrence O'Donnell. And some of those talking points are good, but they didn't, no one had to work at this. They just listened to it and took it to the coffee shop the next day. And, what Jefferson had in mind for us is that we would all think for ourselves, that we would be an enlightened people, and to be enlightened is hard work. I've been lucky. I get to read for a living. So I have a library of 20,000 volumes here in the middle of North Dakota. I'm buried in books, too many books. I need an annex. Help, please, somebody. I need a librarian, please. But I'm lucky because I see the world through books. So I've been reading this book about Harry Truman. It's called The Accidental Presidency, which is an outstanding book I just happened upon. And there's a whole section in it on the birth of Israel in 1947 and 1948.
Wow.
And now that I've read it, I'm in a somewhat better position to try to understand what's going on in Gaza at this moment than I was before I read that book. And so I just urge everyone to say, before I spout, do I have any idea what I'm talking about? Or am I just taking derivatives from my favorite talk show hosts? And if you have to have a favorite, it should be someone like Michael Smerconish, who prides himself on being a centrist. And I'll also say that that NPR and PBS, I think, are now doing the best media work in the country on things like this. I think that they're scrupulously fair-minded, thorough, and the talking points are not 5 seconds. They're 35 seconds. So I think there are ways we can do this, but it's a commitment. And the question is, are you, Paul, willing to make the commitment? Am I, George or Judy, living in Broken Bow, Nebraska, willing to make the commitment to know something before I talk? But if we are, things will calm down.
Clay Jenkinson, our guest today, award-winning historian, author, public humanities scholar, and presenting at Smithsonian Associates coming up. The title of Clay Jenkinson's presentation is The Culture Wars. How can we lower the temperature? We'll have links so that our audience can find out more information about Clay Jenkinson and his upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation, as well as all the rest of the work that Clay Jenkinson is doing. Clay, I'm going to look for a link for your tour, and I hope to find it. If I don't find it immediately, I'll keep searching, but congrats on all of this work, and we're going to listen and we're going to be paying attention. But thanks so much for your generous time today. It is always so great to talk to you, and please, please, please come back.
Let's keep talking, Paul. My website is ltamerica.org, listening to America, ltamerica.org. I've got my Airstream now. I need a Ford F-150, so I know someone out there wants to give me a beautiful black Batman-like Ford F-150.
Let's do it.
I'll see you at the Smithsonian.
Yes. Thank you, Clay Jenkinson. We're going to be rooting for you on that Ford F-150 too. So good luck on everything. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, my friend.
My thanks to Smithsonian Associate Clay Jenkinson. Clay Jenkinson will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates Interview Series coming up, so please check out our website and show notes today for more details. My thanks to you. My thanks to the Smithsonian team for all they do to support the show. My thanks to you, my wonderful audience here on radio and podcast. Please be well, be safe, and remember, let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next week.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview Series on radio and podcast. To find out more about all of today's stories or to view our extensive back catalog of previous shows, simply visit notold-better.com. Join us again next time as we deep dive into some of the most fascinating real-life stories from across the world, all focused on this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview Series on radio and podcast.